In 1929, in the basement of a house in Appleton, Wisconsin, a machinist named Niels Miller was building an arc welder from scrap steel and coil windings, salvaged from discarded equipment. The problem he was trying to solve was not a shortage of welding machines. It was that the machines already on the market ran on industrial-grade direct current power. And no farmer, no small shop, no country blacksmith in the Fox River Valley could pull that kind of current through the wire running to his building. Miller finished the machine. He sold it to a customer in Appleton. He built another. Within 6 years, Miller Electric Manufacturing Company was incorporated, and by the middle of the 20th century, the small welder from the basement had grown into one of the largest arc welding equipment manufacturers in the United States. For 64 years, the company belonged to the Miller family and to the city on the Fox River that had grown up around its factory on West Spencer Street. At least that was the arrangement the workers in Appleton assumed would hold. Then in the early 1990s, the heir who was supposed to carry the family into the next century died. The descendants met to decide the future of the company, and a diversified manufacturing conglomerate from Glenview, Illinois, arrived with a stock offer of approximately $250 million. This is the fascinating story of Miller Electric, the Wisconsin welder empire that lost its family. The scrap steel Niels Miller used to build his first welder came from equipment other companies had thrown away. 64 years later, the company he founded would itself become a component in someone else's larger machine, one of more than 100 acquisitions Illinois Toolworks made during the 1990s alone. But in 1929, that ending was unimaginable. Northeastern Wisconsin in the late 1920s was farm country. Dairies, machine shops, small equipment repair operations, paper mills along the Fox River. The electrical grid running to those buildings could handle lights, small motors, a shop tool or two. It could not run the heavy direct current rotary welders that shipyards in Milwaukee and railroad shops in Chicago used. A farmer whose plow frame cracked, whose combine snapped a steel arm, whose dairy stanchion broke at the weld, had two choices: haul the broken part to a machine shop with industrial power, or replace the equipment. Niels Miller was a machinist who understood the problem from the inside. Working in the basement of his home in Appleton, he designed an arc welder for stick welding that would run on ordinary single-phase power. Lighter than the industrial units, cheaper, portable enough for a small shop to load onto a truck. The first machine was assembled from recycled scrap steel and coil windings. He sold it to a customer nearby. He built another. The buyers were farmers, garage owners, small fabrication shops in Fond du Lac and Green Bay and Oshkosh, who had been priced out of welding entirely. By 1935, Miller had incorporated the operation as Miller Electric Manufacturing Company. The workforce was small, Miller himself, a handful of assembly workers, and a single engineer named Al Mulder. Mulder is the reason the company survived the second half of the 1930s. Working alongside Miller, Mulder designed the world's first high-frequency, stabilized, alternating current industrial welder, a machine that made AC welding practical for factory floors and construction sites for the first time. Before Mulder, industrial welding meant direct current, meant heavy equipment, meant the same barriers that had shut farmers out. After Mulder, the small Appleton company held a patent on a category the entire industry had been waiting for. If you believe this kind of story is worth preserving, the story of a family, a factory, and the town that grew up around it, consider subscribing to this channel. This channel exists to keep these histories from disappearing along with the plants that made them. Every subscription is a signal that the hands behind the logo still matter. Now let's continue. When the United States entered the Second World War, the demand curve for welding equipment turned nearly vertical. Every Liberty ship coming out of the coastal shipyards required tens of thousands of welded seams. Aircraft manufacturers on both coasts needed welders that could be operated by workers trained in weeks instead of years. Ordnance plants across the Midwest were bringing on unskilled labor and needed equipment that could be run without a 3-year apprenticeship. Miller Electric's Appleton plant absorbed as much of the wartime order flow as its workforce could handle. The Fox River Valley labor pool was steady. The paper mills and knitting mills that had defined the local economy for decades sent workers to the Welder plant, where the wages during the war years were higher and the work was constant. By the end of the war, the small company that had started in a basement was one of the recognized suppliers of arc welding equipment to American industry. The Appleton factory, that had been small enough for the founder to know every employee by name, had begun the process of becoming something else. And that was not even the part that changed the trajectory. In 1948, 3 years after the war ended, Miller Electric introduced the first portable gasoline-powered welder. The design removed the last physical tether between a welder and a shop wall. A farmer with a broken combine standing in a field 3 miles from any building could now strike an arc. A pipeline crew laying line across open country could weld on site instead of hauling steel back to a fabrication shop. A construction crew on a rural road project no longer needed to string temporary power to run its equipment. For the customer base Niels Miller had been serving since 1929, this was not an incremental improvement. It was the completion of the original idea. The problem he had set out to solve, welding equipment that went where the customer already was, had been solved. By the late 1960s, metal inert gas welding, MIG welding, it was faster than stick welding, cleaner and easier to learn. But the equipment required 2 separate units, a power source, a wire feeder. The two had to be set up together, calibrated together, transported together. For a large fabrication shop with staff engineers, that was manageable. For the farmer, the fleet mechanic, the small fabricator who had been Miller's customer base since the basement, it was too much. In 1971, Miller Electric introduced the Millermatic 35, power source and wire feeder combined in a single housing. Plug it in, run the wire, weld. For the small shop, MIG welding had just become as approachable as stick welding had become in the 1940s. The Millermatic name would be attached to the company's wire feed line for the next half-century. Through the 1970s and into the 1980s, Miller Electric reached its widest footprint under family control. The blue paint on the machines had become an identity mark in every farm shed in the upper Midwest, every truck repair shop, every small fabrication operation from the Dakotas to Ohio. The Blue Star engine-driven welder generators were sold as farm and ranch equipment. small enough to bolt onto a pickup truck bed, powerful enough to run a stick electrode all day. The Thunderbolt stick welders lived in tens of thousands of small shops, plugged into a 240-volt outlet, ready when the tractor came in bent. Millermatic MIG machines took over the wire feed segment in body shops, fabricators, and vocational school welding programs. The Appleton workforce grew. The West Spencer Street plant covered 850,000 square feet. The company was privately held, still controlled by the Miller family, still headquartered in the town where the first machine had been built. The character of the operation was small enough that a plant manager could name every foreman. Employees stayed for careers, not for stints. Fathers brought sons onto the assembly line. The relationship between the family and the workforce, between the plant and the city of Appleton, was of a single piece. Everything Niels Miller had set in motion in 1929 was still in place, and the plant, the workforce, the blue paint, the family, the customer relationship stretching from the Dakotas to Ohio. What nobody in Appleton could see in the middle of the 1980s was what all of it was quietly building toward. The operational habits the family had grown through 5 decades of privately held expansion were, by the standards of the industrial buyers circling the sector, inefficient. The plant was building too many models. 6 to 8 weeks to build a welder. Inventory stacked in aisles. 100,000 different parts stocked, when only 22,000 were used regularly. The company's own generosity in serving every possible customer, the trait that had defined it since Niels Miller sold his first machine in Appleton, had built a factory that would look, on paper, like an acquisition target. There had been observers inside the welding industry who had watched the family-owned equipment manufacturers of the post-war era get bought out one by one through the 1980s. Some of the older figures at Miller, veterans of the sales floor and the engineering group, had privately expected the moment would eventually reach Appleton as well, when the heir who was expected to carry the company into the next generation died in the early 1990s. The moment arrived faster than any of them had anticipated. The Miller family descendants met to decide the future of the business. The company was generating over $250 million in annual revenue. It employed approximately 2,800 people globally. It had operations across the United States and international facilities. It was, by any measure, a leader in its industry. But it was also a privately held family business without a clear next generation to run it. Illinois Tool Works, a Fortune 500 diversified manufacturer headquartered in Glenview, Illinois, offered approximately $250 million in a stock exchange for the Miller Group Limited, Miller Electric's parent. ITW had been founded in 1912 by Byron L. Smith. Its business model, refined through decades of acquisitions, was to buy well-run companies and reorganize them into smaller, decentralized business units. What its executives called a small win strategy. Miller Electric would be one of approximately 100 acquisitions ITW made during the 1990s alone. The Miller family agreed to the sale. In 1993, the company that had been founded in the basement of an Appleton home became a subsidiary of a conglomerate headquartered in a suburb of Chicago. And then Miller Electric made the decision that changed how the Appleton plant operated. It was not a decision made by the Miller family, who no longer had the vote. It was made by an ITW executive vice president named Dennis Martin, sent to Appleton to turn the newly acquired Welder business around. Martin walked into what the Miller family had built over 6 decades, 850,000 square feet of factory floor, 100,000 stocked parts, 6 to 8 week build times, workers moving inventory from one location to another because the shop layout had grown around convenience instead of design. He cut the parts count by 80%. He split the company into 13 separate business units, each with its own profit and loss statement, each run by a general manager who reported into ITW's Welding group. He shifted decision-making down to the factory floor and gave individual employees the authority to spend up to $1,000 redesigning their own workstations. Revenue more than doubled. Operating margins climbed above 16%. By the measures ITW used, the acquisition was a success. The Appleton plant kept its address, kept its workforce, kept the blue paint on the machines rolling out of the loading dock. What it did not keep was the arrangement Niels Miller had set up in 1929. Miller Electric was now one product line inside a conglomerate that would eventually operate more than 800 businesses across 52 countries. In 1996, ITW acquired Hobart Brothers, the welding consumables company that had been Miller's sister brand across the industry for decades. Bernard, Weldcraft and Smith Equipment followed. Miller became the anchor of ITW's welding platform, a 1,400-employee subsidiary answering to a corporate headquarters in a suburb of Chicago. It had never had reason to think about before. 1993. Most people driving past the plant on West Spencer Street would not notice the shift. The building looks the same. Approximately 1,400 people work there. The trucks pulling out of the loading dock carry welders painted the same blue they have been painted since the Miller family owned the plant. Miller branded Thunderbolt stick welders, Blue Star engine-driven welder generators, Millermatic MIG units. The product line has grown to include battery-powered welders, plasma cutters, and digital interfaces the founder would not have recognized. In 2005, ITW opened Shanghai Miller Welding Equipment, extending the brand into Asia through a channel Niels Miller never built. The Miller family is no longer in the room. There is no descendant on the board, no family member walking the factory floor, no heir being groomed for the next generation. The family name is on the building. The family is not in the company. What Niels Miller built in the basement in 1929 is still made in Appleton. Whose it is has changed. Somewhere inside the West Spencer Street plant, an employee who was hired at Miller in the years before the sale has been assembling welders for more than 3 decades. He was in the plant when the announcement came in 1993. He watched the parts count get cut. He watched the 13 business units get formed. He watched the family name stay on the door while the arrangement behind the name changed. He is still there. The welder coming off the line in front of him will be shipped to a farm in North Dakota, a fabrication shop in Alabama, or a pipeline crew in Texas, and it will still be painted blue. What the plant makes has continued. What the plant belongs to has not.